sex, but for every time interval thereafter, the sexes depart, with women becoming kind of skeptical about the idea as you hit a week and basically bottom out at a day, and men still being, somewhat positive at a week and never, in fact, never bottoming out. And so we've now replicated this study going out to a minute, a second, and a nanosecond to see whether men come down. In fact, to my dismay, they don't. They just stay level, right? Men just never become extremely disinclined to having sex in something they find attractive. Okay. Sex differences in reasons for sex. We have 238 reasons for sex, actually 237, excuse me. And these are two of them. Men say, when the opportunity presented itself. So women more likely to say, to express my love. Here's something called a sexual overperception bias. And the classic case is woman smiles at a man, okay? And you say, well, what was her intention? Why did she smile at the man? And what we find, or let's say she invited him to her apartment for a drink. Okay, so we did studies on what we call the sexual overperception bias, and basically, to just give you the overview, passionately kissed, said I love you, held hands, she invited the man to a drink, to her apartment for a drink. Huge sex difference. So identical cues, men are more likely to infer sexual interest or sexual intent. And the same occurs with a smile. Okay, she smiled at me. Of course she wants me. But smiling is one of these diabolically ambiguous cues where it's, in fact, there are many interpretations of a potential smile. Smile could mean mere friendliness. It could mean sexual interest, but it could mean friendliness, it could mean politeness, it could mean nervousness, it could mean a variety of things. So it's an inherently ambiguous social signal, but when men experience that smile from a woman, they're more likely to infer sexual interest. The Florida study, I have to mention the Florida study. Okay, this is all just basically, I should briefly explain the logic, this all flows from this fundamental sex difference in obligatory parental investment, where from a reproductive standpoint, historically it has just been paid off. Short-term mating has paid off more for males than for females in reproductive currencies. And you can see that because if you consider a man and a woman, and the man has sex with 100 women in the course of 1 year versus a woman having sex with 100 men in the course of 1 year, well, her reproductive output is still going to be a maximum of 1. Because of that 9-month obligatory investment. And so it just falls logically out of that fundamental aspect of our reproductive biology. But it shows up in behavioral data, and I just want to present this one last study on this before shifting into the darker side and getting into infidelity and mate poaching. We're still on the light topic so far. And that is a study conducted in Florida. And in Texas, I don't know what the regulations are, but in Texas we have what are called IRBs. They're institutional review boards that examine our procedures to make sure that we're ethically treating our participants, as they're called these days. In Florida, apparently they don't have them. I don't know, but this is a study conducted in Florida, but it's an interesting study. Basically what they did is they had males and females on a college campus who were part of the experimental team simply walk up to members of the opposite sex and they would say, hi, I've been noticing you around campus lately, I find you attractive. And they asked them one of three questions. Would you go out on a date with me? Would you go back to my apartment with me? Would you have sex with me? And it was a between groups design for those interested in experimental design. So different people were asked different questions, and they simply recorded the percentage of individuals who agreed to these three requests. Of the women approached by the male experimenter, 50% agreed to go out on a date with the guy, 6% agreed to go back to his apartment, and 0% agreed to have sex with him. In fact, women in this sex condition thought it was rather peculiar, a guy just walking up out of the blue, hi, I've been noticing you on campus, would you have sex with me? Some were insulted, some just thought it was a little bizarre. Of the men approached by the female confederates, also 50% of the men agreed to go out on a date with her, 69% agreed to go back to her apartment, and 75% were to have sex with him. So, and of the 25% of the men who declined, many were apologetic about it, citing a fiance or a girlfriend or parents in town and asking for a phone number and a rain check. And far from being insulted or finding it bizarre, men were very flattered that this occurred, and I'm sure it's one of these things that probably had never happened to them before. So for those of you who are still skeptical about the idea that men and women might differ in their underlying sexual psychology, I'll just draw your attention to this last figure, 75% versus 0%. And it's a study that's been replicated in various other kinds of contexts, including in North Texas. So, okay, how does men's short-term mating strategy produce sexual conflict? Well, I have to introduce another concept now, and that's the notion of sexually antagonistic coevolution. When evolutionary biologists talk about the process of coevolution, they typically refer to coevolution between different species, such as predators and prey, or parasites and hosts. So with predators and prey, you can see that they're locked in this antagonistic coevolutionary arms race where for each increment in speed and agility of predators, that selects for increments in speed and agility of prey. And so they basically are locked in this arms race where the slower fail to get dinner, the slower predators fail to get dinner, and the slower prey get eaten. And so they evolve more and more sophisticated adaptations to prevent either becoming someone's dinner or to prevent starving to death. Now, this process, and it also occurs with parasites and hosts, where basically each one of us has thousands of parasites teeming within our body, and they're basically feeding on our metabolic resources and are, generally speaking, bad for us. And so we've evolved defenses to combat these parasites, but they keep evolving to counter, to circumvent our defenses. And so, as I said, mostly biologists have talked about between species antagonistic coevolution, but the same logic applies to within species antagonistic coevolution between the sexes. So you could have, let's say, an offense, a strategy on the part of a male that